three fascinating presentations. Time for questions, please.
Thank you all. Can you recite the verse on Matan Torah, on the people who are there and all the people who will be there? My question here is whether the wording in the Torah actually gives a language basis for Rambam and Bikurim.
So you're right. You could somehow, and that's what a lot of the rabbinic authorities do, is start to be medayek, right, on the language. So I mean, the verse in Dvarim is for the second tithing is Hashkifa Mimon Kachka Min Hashamayim Uvarech et Amcha et Yisrael et Adama Asher Natata Lanu. But again, it's Asher Nishbata Lavotenu. Eretz Zavat Chalav and Devash. And some rabbinic authorities, of course, also another answer was, oh, here by Maaser Sheni it says Eretz Zavat Chalav Udevash, the land flowing with milk and honey, that it didn't point out by Bikurim, and the land flowing with milk and honey can only be to us, Israelites. It wasn't promised exactly to Abraham, and therefore Maimonides doesn't consider a direct line from that oath. So,
Take questions inside. Yeah.
Okay, so two questions to Ram. Thank you very much. The first question is quite convincing that the halachic sources do not necessitate some philosophical rulings, but enable. My question is whether there is some contribution to the halachic sources, to the philosophical approach of the Rambam. Does his linguistic approach is only Aristotelian that needs to fit in some way, one way or another, with the halachic sources, or there is some contribution, philosophical contribution to the halachic sources? This is one question. And the other question is a workshop about theology. So what is the theological basis for such a linguistic approach of Maimonides with respect or with comparison to Aristotle?
Well, I'll answer the second question first. And this concerns also what Jim spoke about. Following Berman's article, Maimonides is the disciple of Al-Farabi, and Al-Farabi has a dictum, that religion is an imitation of philosophy. So, you're asking about the theological basis. The theological basis is this dictum of Al-Farabi. And what Maimonides is doing is how to show that religion is an imitation of philosophy. You treat religion as a linguistic entity, and language must be interpreted. So his whole understanding of religion is understanding of language. I hope this answers your question about the theological basis, the theological interest. That's one thing. I think that law and philosophy, first of all, should be understood separately, because each realm has its own methodology, canons, authorities, terminology. So I think first of all you should understand philosophy. Secondly, understand the legal discussion. And then ask, what is the relationship? I think that when Maimonides learned, he learned in a traditional way. He learned Bavli, he learned Yerushalmi. He also learned everything that Professor Leibson read. Now, when he sat in the evening thinking about how to harmonize all this material, I think he mostly interpreted law with philosophy and not vice versa. Of course, I cannot support this with texts and proofs, but it seems to me that he was a legal codifier, first of all, and he used philosophy in order to understand law. I don't think, well, again, I'm not sure if this is correct, but it seems to me that he didn't he didn't see legal materials as supporting philosophy. Again, religion is an imitation, and as an imitation, it should be understood through philosophy, by philosophy. Philosophy is the source, and we should shape religion and show how religion is an imitation. So I think he understood that it might be that we should rule according to Stam Mishnah that the proselyte do not recite this dictum. But if it should be an imitation to philosophy, we will turn to the Yerushalmi. And not vice versa. I don't think he said, oh, the Yerushalmi is very philosophical, so this is probably the right ruling. I think it was the other way around.
Well, thank you for your talk. I enjoyed your handout, and I think it's strategically designed because you've placed the quote from the guide, number 3, between Aristotle and some Muslim thinkers. So I think it's hinted at in what you're saying, and so it's not surprising. But I do have a question. So that strategy says that Maimonides here is reasonably Aristotelian, but he's accepting Aristotle, but resisting the Islamic approach.
Some Islamic approaches.
Yeah. But in terms of the divinity of language and being given from God. So is it possible that we should understand Nachmanides, here's my question, Nachmanides and Rashba as already under a notion that competes with these Islamic approaches, in that not only is their Arabic a divine and the Quran a divinely document, but so is the Torah. That's my question.
If I understand correctly, you're asking what I think the Nachmanides and the Rashba, first of all, they come from the Kabbalistic school. And I don't think this is a tradition of the Jews in the Islamic world. This comes from Christian Spain, Provence, and so on. It's a big story, as we all know. It may be that some Orthodox Islamic approaches still function in their approach, namely the idea of Tawqif and Ilham. Although Nachmanides here is quite difficult, because, for example, in his commentary on Parashat Vayigash, when Yosef says, Ki pia medaber elechem, Nachmanides says that Hebrew language was the language of the Canaanites. And it seems that in his approach, language was a human language, and God just used it in order to give the Torah. It does not contradict Islamic approaches to Tawqif. I think Ramban and the Rashba are people of Christian Europe, and I'm not sure if we should bring here discussions that were relevant in Islamic people.
First, I don't know who to thank first. First, I want to thank Jim for the very kind words that he used. It's very kind. Then I want to thank the speakers, the presenters. Amiram, I want to be a little more persuaded after I read your article, after I read the article. I sort of liked what Moshe said, and I do think that Rambam is fairly conservative towards the end. He tries very hard to go into the halachic background, the Talmudic background, so that he can he can live with that, and I don't see that he's bringing that much of a philosophical view to it. Having said that, I think that we are all very, very shy here. We are not bold enough, I think. We are talking about enabling, and enabling is not the right word. In reality, Rambam was a lot more creative than that. He actually used philosophical thought to create law. He created law that didn't exist. And in my book, I go through some of those, and I mean, you don't have to go very far. The first one is Anochi Hashem Elokecha. That law was not a law among the Geonim. They didn't know about knowing God. That was not a law, and he created that law. So philosophy actually helped them create law, not just enable, but create law. And I'm not very good at finding my things in the computer, so. But I remember that there were a number of laws, for example, that had to do with a well-functioning judicial system in the adoption of just procedures, which is Mitzvot Aseh 178, 175, 179. They were influenced by the Muslim courts and their interest in procedural matters, and also philosophical issues. But he created those laws. Those are mitzvot d'oraita. Those are actually biblical laws that he created that nobody else had. So we have to go beyond this idea of enabling. He actually creates law, right? And so there's two levels here, I think. There is a level in which he has got to stay within the law, and when he stays within the rabbinic discussion, he will use the general rules of you go according to the majority, and he will justify it in Talmudic terms, and that he does, and he brings it down to earth. And I don't think we have to look for very sophisticated philosophical views when it comes to those. But then there is the higher ones in which he creates law. And I think maybe in the next workshop, if we have to do one, we should dedicate one to this whole idea. I remember that Harvey had this question. Does Tversky, when he does, Tversky in his book, in his introduction book to the Mishnah Torah, will go through the 613 and say the Rambam identified the 613, and now we have the reasons for the 613. But that's justification after the fact. I mean, anybody can do that. You can take those and you can justify them after the fact. The point is not that. The point is, what did he create? And Tversky missed the point. And Harvey, I think, was somewhat right in this. He actually created laws. And so I think this is very exciting and very, very good, but we got to move away from enabling. Enabling is not the right term.
It's a different word in Hebrew.
What is the word?
If I can respond, I think we should distinguish between two kinds of laws. One is philosophical laws. For example, the commandment to know God. Okay, this I do not consider as a real Talmudic issue. This is a philosophical issue that found place in his legal codex. Because, again, religion is an imitation to philosophy, so religion must command philosophical commandments. The other kind of law is a real Talmudic law, thing that you can support or defend with sources, with texts. And here I think a Jewish legal codifier found himself obligated to a tradition, to texts. He cannot say whatever he wants. He must support himself and bring proofs. And here I think creativity is an important factor, but as much as the codifier will be creative, he must support himself through the text. So again, I think in this issue, in this realm of Talmudic law, the question is what does the source enable?
We have a question here.
Uh, Yeah, just two comments. One to Professor Rubitsky. Yes, in terms of methodologically, law, philosophy, philosophy. It depends on what you mean by philosophy. In philosophy, around the Aristotelian philosophy, there are two kinds of philosophy. There's practical philosophy, practicos, and there's theoretical philosophy. I would venture to say that both, I mean, Friedberg referred to the theoretical aspect in terms of belief in the existence of God. But the practical, Aristotelian teleology just permeates the Mishnah Torah. In fact, I always shock students when I give a seminar on Moreh Nevuchim. When I tell them, I said, I think that the Mishnah Torah is a more interesting philosophical work because it's much less wedded to an outmoded metaphysics that Maimonides is operating with, whereas the Mishnah Torah is operating with a datum that's still with us, like the halacha, living according to. Just wanted to make a point to, more textual point to Professor Diamond. And that is the difference between the Mishnah in Bikurim and the Mishnah in Maser Sheni. And I think that one, adopting a more historical and philosophical approach can resolve the contradiction much more easily than simply pinning it on Latet Lanu, future, past, or whatever. In the context of Maser Sheni, you're dealing with something that has, by the time of the Mishnah, has no connection to anything that anybody is doing. Whereas Mr. Bikurim, although Bikurim, but the real question there is whether the ger can be shaliach tzibur in terms of tefillah. That's something that people are doing. And that's where the Rambam, with the basis in the Yerushalmi, which he wouldn't have had Maser Sheni, because there's the Yerushalmi Maser Sheni doesn't deal with that, but the Yerushalmi in Bikurim does. On that particular point, because he's dealing with something that, plus the fact is dealing with tefillah. Now, tefillah requires precisely an understanding of whom you are praying to and who is doing the praying. So there, the theoretical aspect, the philosophical theoretical aspect, lends itself, and the historical context of actually doing something that people are doing. And then you have the Yerushalmi, and therefore he can do this, and he has more of a theological, philosophical reason for doing this than worrying about Maser Sheni as something that's hilchot of the Mashiach. I mean, really, it's either in the past or it's way off in the future. So in that case, that is the factor there that I think largely determines it, and that one doesn't have to resort to kind of peel that in words, but seeing how he is the problem that he has before him. Because Ovadia Daguerre is asking about whether he's a real member of the community. There are no ger who are asking whether they can read Maser Sheni or not. So anyway, that's just two comments.
I can.
Look, so many questions and time is running out. Please.
Very simple question, a conchological question. I didn't understand your argumentation that Homashini in Gittin are roles containing only one book rather than codices. Why couldn't it be codices?
I think that in those times, codices were not available.
Of course they were. I mean, if you take Origenes, the school of Caesarea, these libraries were full of codices. I mean, that's certainly not. That's the time of the 4th century for codices is certainly not true.
Okay, so it may be that they're speaking about one book of the Pentateuch scroll and the codex.
Short questions, please.
Just that, there is another field when they discuss the distinction between Chumashim and Sefer Torah. It's a procedure of taking oath. And it was, because usually the only times they took the oath from the Sefer Torah. But later on, they raised a question if you permitted to do the oath also with Chumashim. And I think that Maimonides himself or somebody else was asked if Chumashim is legitimate or not. So this is another place when it's relevant to the distinction between these two, maybe it's relevant to your discussion here about linguistics.
Should we take another question in the back? Lars?
Yes, I'd like to ask Moshe. You addressed a few times the Rashi's approach to language, and you said that a thing is how his approach to language is very different from that of Maimonides, and they still come to the same conclusion.
Also, both of them allowed to read from machine.
Yes, so that's a challenge to Rimitsky's proposal. Where do we know about Rashi's approach to language from?
Thank you, that's an important question. There is no research that deals with linguistic theory. I don't know about Rashi, but Rashi a lot of times mention gematriot and other qualities of the language, which close to the Nachmanides than the Maimonides. It doesn't seem to me that Rashi show only the content of the language, but also the letters and the graphic but there is no...
And yet Rashi's corpus is somewhat, it poses a different challenge for research try to outline philosophy, because he's a collector first, and then, at least when he represents the Torah, he cites as much as he writes. So
yeah, but if we connected the philosophical approach that the main issue of the language is just the content, the natural approach, Rashi is not included from this group, in my opinion. And also, nevertheless, he allowed to read from Chumashim with a brocha, because his approach that Kriyas HaTorah is just for the content of the Torah, without connecting to the language.
I just want to mention one last thing. It's not so much on the relationship between halacha and philosophy, but the linguistic issue here to me, and it kind of dawned on me actually as I was reading your paper and thinking about this. Perhaps his theory on Lashon HaKodesh, that it's simply, that it's conventional, that it's not natural, that it's not divine language, that it can change, that it can evolve, I think is the most, to the way Judaism has evolved to this day, is the most subversive of traditional Judaism. All of mysticism, everything. Forget about his positions on Hashgacha or eternality or creation or anything like that. Language, right? He's totally eviscerated the entire basis for Kabbalah, for Gematria. I don't believe that the Rambam, correct me if I'm wrong, ever uses a Gematria.
He did.
Oh. Oh, okay. All right. Sorry. I knew you'd come up with something. But again, it's a play. He has some more strength. But it totally demolishes. So I just want to end with one thing that I'm not sure if you cited, but where he takes on the Ramban, Nachmanides takes on the Rambam directly on this issue in his Perush on the Shekel HaKodesh. The Shekel, it's cultural. And there he says, Hinehu lashon shekadosh baruch hu yitalish mo medaber bo. So it's the language that God speaks, and that's actually pshat. I mean, that's the pshat. You don't have to go to Islamic, you don't have to go to anything. It's reading the Torah, right? God said, Eor, so he spoke Eor. But he spoke that Anochiv lo yelecha, the Dibrot are in Hebrew. And here I think is most important, and what you mentioned about that the entire Chumash can be read as a long string of the names of God, right? Ubonik rabishmotav hakadoshim, El Elohim tzvachot. That all the names of God are in Hebrew. And this really, the Rambam's theory, linguistic theory about the names of God, I mean, this completely undermines all of Kabbalah, all of what people associate with traditional Judaism, that the words, that the letters are the building blocks of the universe. Forget it. So I just wanted to point out that this is a really, far more than I think positions on Hashgacha, or this is really the issue that maybe there should be more work on.
Okay, well, I'm going to be very creative and say thank you very much to to our panel, and then enable everyone to go and have some coffee before the next.
Oh, yes,
Like